been a while since I've posted, actually a couple of weeks. My last video, I had talked about all the stuff I needed to do, and that I just needed to go to Adoration Chapel and really put that before God. And, um, and that was really, really helpful. And it was a good reminder as I got busy and continued to get busy, and things piled up. I just went back to that video and I was like, that's the mindset I need to remember to be in. Um, but I want to share with you, of course, a couple of things that have been happening. Of course, the semester started, and we started 3 courses. I mentioned in my last video, graduate level sort of seminars, one on epistemology, one on metaphysics. Those both are for second-year students. And then a third one is on ancient philosophy, and that's for my first-year students. And in the first 2, I have only 2 students. And then in the third one, I have 3 students. And so I want to share with you a little bit what that's been about, because it's been really fascinating. Not what I have expected. For example, epistemology, it's turned out to be one of my favorite classes. We're going through this book. It's called Faith and Certitude by Thomas Dubay. He's a Marianist priest. Faith and Certitude, Father Thomas Dubay. He's the late Father Thomas Dubay. He's passed away by now. Could we be sure to the things that matter most to us? And given that I don't have to teach 35 students, I don't have to stand up there and lecture and stuff. Pedagogically, it's just amazingly different. Have to be really well prepared, much more prepared than normal, but in some ways less prepared too, because I have to be open to some discussion coming up, but more prepared in the sense that, that's years of preparation I have to be working on. I had learned this stuff early on, and I got to make sure I bring that all to the table. It's quite a different kind of preparation when you only have 2 students. Of course, they can't run and hide from not having read. I make sure that you just can't hide when there's only 2 students doing the reading. It's quite different that way. But I'm finding especially in this epistemology course, very, very different than what you'd ever find in a secular university. So in a secular university, of course, epistemology, is the study of knowledge. How do we know things? What do we know? Is the external world real? Issues like skepticism, relativism, truth, knowledge, all the above. But in this course, the first reading I had them do, it starts with the first chapter called The Empty Ache. The Empty Ache. He argues that we as human beings are constituted such that we are chasing after something all the time, and that it's an existential approach. It's really quite interesting. You would not expect this in an epistemology course. You might expect this in a 20th century philosophy course, in a continental philosophy course, or an existentialism course, or maybe even an ethics course. But in an epistemology course, just think about the empty ache. Empty ache for what? To know things? He's going there and talking through the whole first chapter, the empty ache. We're made to be filled. We're empty. And I kept asking when we discussed this chapter in class, I'm like, what in the world has this got to do with epistemology? He doesn't seem to really be tying it back to there. And to my surprise, though, after sitting with it, I never caught it the first time I read it. But after sitting with it a second time and then discussing it in class, I suddenly began to realize what he's doing. He's not doing epistemology the way you would at a secular university, such that man is the starting point, right? At a secular university for epistemology, you would have, you'd be pitting ideas against one another. You'd say foundationalism, which is, roughly based in Descartes, the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. You have a foundation upon which you cannot be wrong. It's an infallible thing you can know, and then you build up from there. It's like an upside down pyramid. Think about it like that. You contrast that method of knowing with another method called coherentism. And that would be more like kind of a raft. You have all these interlocking pieces, And it's important that your ideas be coherent, right? And so we may not have something. The problem with that, of course, is it's not like foundationalism. You could have a coherent raft of beliefs that are really internally coherent, but hey, that's what a conspiracy theory is like as well. They really support one another and reinforce one another, but they're not tied to reality. They're just kind of free floating. The problem with foundationalism, on the other hand, is that you can start really, really small, but then kind of how do you get up to the the less certain beliefs that are just as existentially and religiously and philosophically important. But this class and this book does not start from there. If you've taken philosophy, that sounds super familiar to you. Foundationalism versus coherentism. This class instead starts with the empty ache. And the best I can make of it is this. He's doing theological anthropology. That is, anthropology is study of man, and then theological, from our relationship with God. So the study of man, looking at man, and in this case, as a knower, right, because we're doing epistemology, looking at man from a theological perspective. He's starting there, because a lot of secular places, they'll start with just what can man know, and they just jump over all these assumptions about who made human beings. What are human beings like? Are they good knowers? Are they bad knowers? We can be fooled about a lot of things, but are we in general good about knowing things? So that's where he starts. He ties that to our emptiness, right? He ties that to the things that we chase. Interestingly, he actually ties this to a very familiar and famous metaphysical characterization you may have heard of in metaphysics, the debate between the one and the many. The one and the many. So you can think of this in terms of like monism and pluralism. Yeah, or you can think about in terms of monotheism and polytheism or something. But right, there's the one and there's the many, if you want to get really abstract. And that's a very famous sort of metaphysical puzzle. What he's doing, though, is he's saying that the one, he's identifying that with God, and then the many as the other pleasures that we chase. So he's saying we were made to be filled, and paradoxically, we are born unfilled, like we are empty. That's why we're aching to be filled. Filled with what? Well, we seek after pleasures, and we need to be seeking after God. Well, what the heck does that have to do with this knowing things? Well, that's the rub. That's the interesting sort of puzzle. What the heck does it have to do with knowing things? Because I will come to chase these pleasures, but I may learn as I'm chasing these pleasures to put my trust in or my faith in certain things that I ought not to be putting that in, being reliant upon certain pleasures when I should be more reliant upon God, right? And so that goes back to the idea God made us, and to be truly happy is to chase after the one. And then, of course, he's going to connect this, again, still doing epistemology, to God as truth, God as ultimate good, right? And God as ultimate beauty. So that the closer you draw to God, you're getting closer to things that are good, but you're also removing all the, bypassing all the sensory pleasures, the many, right? You're drawing close to the one, getting closer to the good, but you're also getting closer to the true. And that just is completely foreign to my little mind, that I had no idea that this was a way of doing epistemology at all. And it's quite radical at least with respect to modern day stuff. You would never hear about this from this perspective in a secular university class whatsoever. And one more thing before I forget, when I'm teaching this epistemology class, this came up actually just the other day, maybe 2 days ago, and not just in the epistemology class, in ancient philosophy as well. We were discussing specifically in epistemology, skepticism, right? As you know, skepticism, it can be taken as a really radical view in the sense that you just doubt everything in the world that could possibly be doubted. You doubt whether you exist. It's very, very radical, actually, and not healthy. It's practically unlivable. You can't, even David Hume, one of the biggest skeptics ever, philosopher David Hume. He said, at the end of the day, he still exits the room through a door, not a window, and he still plays backgammon, by the rules of the game. You've got to live life. And so it's fruitless to be a radical skeptic, but there's other forms of skepticism. I guess you can call it weak skepticism, or maybe, what does he call it? Partial skepticism in Father Dubay's book. But and this got us on the topic of what are rational grounds for knowledge and believing things, and what are non-rational grounds. Not necessarily irrational, so not necessarily opposed to rationality, but things that are not necessarily rational, such as emotions, such as devotion and loyalty, right? And this, so, because in this chapter, this is at this point in the second chapter of Father Dubay's book, where he's talking about skepticism. In this chapter, let me just make sure I'm not. So, do we need Certitude? Is skepticism viable? Yes. He talks about how it's a healthy receptivity. He talks about the roots of skepticism, namely being our deep woundedness. We refuse to believe in certain, even if the evidence is presented right to us. And that is not rational. That comes from our appetitive or non-rational side. So we were discussing this, and I realized, man, this happens in so many different conversations, whether in person or online. Conversations I've had with people, I will be talking to them, you might call it witnessing. I mean, I'll be witnessing to them, or just trying to have a conversation about anything reasonably or logically, right? Politics, philosophy, religion, anything. And I realized that their hang-up is not actually the intellect. It's not actually something intellectual. It's something that they have a deep loyalty to a certain side, interestingly. And Soren Kierkegaard says it this way. I think it has something to do with love, because he characterizes love, among other things, as giving a mitigating explanation. Love is giving a mitigating explanation. What that means is an explanation, an account of something that's mitigated. It's lessened, right? So like, I explain away things as having lesser of an impact, right? So take, for example, the example I gave in class was, suppose my son, of course I love him very much, suppose he's behind me on a bus or airplane kicking my seat, right? Because I love him, I'm going to sort of just overlook that peccadillo, that small offense. It's not really going to bother me all that much, unless I'm very cranky or something. But if it's some other kid that I don't know, that I don't love, certainly somebody if I hate, or if it's somebody's kid that I hate that person, the parents or something, then I am going to be far less likely to overlook that sort of behavior, and I'll be much angrier, even though it is identical circumstances, right? The same thing is happening to the child behind me kicking my seat, right? I offer a mitigating explanation to the one I love. All this has got to do with witnessing and discussing, having argumentative discussions with people. Well, because you will find, even if you give somebody all the right evidence, right? You identify, that's what they are missing intellectually or rationally, let's say. Oh, this is the line. If I can just get them past this line, I can provide that piece of evidence, whatever, and then that's what they're saying themselves. And then I can, if it's witnessing or something, then boom, I got another soul saved, or however you want to think about it. And then you realize they're just moving the goalposts. You do remove that hurdle, and then they still don't give in. And this has happened so many times in conversations with me. And it's because they have a certain devotion or loyalty to some ideology, whether it be a religious or political or what have you, but it's that they offer a mitigating explanation to. Another example I gave was, I have a mutual friend who I sent a funny Kamala Harris, mistake or something. She misspoke, of course, and she said something like, during COVID, 200 million people died, which of course is obviously not true, because that would be like 2/3 of the United States population. So, but she said it in at least two different contexts, on two different times. And I sent that to this friend, and all she said was she misspoke, right? Because like there's that deep loyalty to that side. But of course, if you hate the politician, you're going to think, what an idiot, right? I can't believe, right? Let's get them out of office or whatever. They don't belong there. Look, they're just so inept, right? So just be on the lookout for this. Everybody wants to be, you may have heard, say with witnessing with someone, you may have heard testimony someone's given where they say, yeah, man, I was told this one thing, this one word by someone, and it opened my eyes. And then I saw the truth and I came to love the Lord. My eyes were opened because of the one thing they said to me. And everybody wants to be that person that provides the missing jigsaw piece. But the problem is you're not going to know. You could talk, whether it's a 5-minute bus ride or whether it's years-long relationship that you're talking back and forth with people. It's really difficult to identify what that missing jigsaw piece is intellectually. And then you realize, well, that's not the whole story. The intellect was just part of it. So, of course, you need to provide that, the intellect, right? Because you can't buy into something if you don't really know what you're buying into. So they of course need to know what they don't know if they're misunderstanding something or whatnot. So you want to provide that intellective piece, but many times you'll find that even when you do provide it, you're still butting up against their affects, their affections, their emotions, their loyalties. And you got to find a way, how do I circumvent that? How do I talk to the person? So that is a very difficult exercise. That is something that, at the end of the day, I was talking to my wife the other day, I think last night, and I said, I don't want to be really, really smart and witty in conversations. I want to be smart enough to identify what that missing jigsaw piece is, and smart enough and let's say sensitive or heart smart enough to know what it is that might be a non-intellectual hangup that they may be dealing with. That if I can circumvent that, or say, maybe it's hatred towards the church, hatred towards religion, right? Problem there is that you can't always call that out directly also, because then it feels very vulnerable and sensitive, and they will, even if they know it themselves, they may not even know that that's their vulnerability or sensitivity, or that's the real hang up. They may just be masking it all as intellect. But if you were to call it out directly, probably not great. That's why I say circumvent. I think wisdom would be find a way to circumvent that, such that I bring it up. Let's say it's hatred towards church, religion. I say something like, I don't know. I not calling them out directly again, but hey, yeah, many people I know have a problem with this, and I don't know if that's you, but and then kind of go on to maybe the intellectual part, the rational parts, to applying the missing piece of evidence that it might be. You might think that it's this missing piece of evidence, but in any case, that is hard to identify. It takes a lot of practice and takes a very wise person to be able to identify that. And a very, not just wise, not just smart, like big intellect, but it requires somebody with a well-developed emotional life and a sensitivity to people and empathy and an understanding of how people really work. And so I encourage you to try to cultivate that in yourself, because Lord knows we need more of that. We don't need more keyboard warriors who are fighting off people, right? We need more people who are more compassionate. Yeah. Now, something I learned, and also I'll talk about this on a different video. That's something I learned about in the Mother Teresa conference. She said that we need more witnesses, not more teachers, because people, especially these days, will relate more to witnesses than they will to a teacher. They don't want somebody who tells them stuff and what to learn and what to know and what to do. They want somebody who says, look, this is what I did and this is what happened. you know, just like the blind man when he was healed by Jesus' miracle. I don't know what happened, but I was once blind, now I see. Just like with Mary Magdalene. I once had this affliction, and all I know now is that I'm healed. That's all I can tell you. And if we have more people like that, then that would be much more of an invitation to seekers this day. And yeah, if you like this content and you want to know more, then just hit subscribe, please. I always love to see new subscribers. And do me a favor and share this video, or pick another video to share if you like one more than this one, and then show around to your friends. I appreciate you. Take care.